Hey gang, what's up? Welcome back here to a special edition of Intuitive Angling. We're going to give you a full seminar, a full tutorial, a full detailed analyzation breakdown of fishing squarebill crankbaits. We're going to go into deep dive into this topic. We're going to talk about where to fish them, how to fish them. We're going to go through all the specific squarebills as far as different sizes, profiles, models, colors, and give you guys literally the most comprehensive squarebill video you'll ever see on YouTube. I think you guys are going to really enjoy it, and it's going to add up to a lot more fish for you guys moving forward here. So anyway, guys, before we get started here, just in exchange for this free seminar here, I'd just like to run by just a list of things you can do if you'd like to support the channel here and give something back for the information, to sort of run through a little bit. The first thing, guys, I invite everybody to swing by fishinthemoment.com and check out our lake map breakdowns. You guys know we do breakdowns. We got breakdowns on the website of all the lakes across the country, all 4 seasons of the year. If any map is not on that website, you can book a virtual lesson with me, and we can go over any lake that you want to go over with an avionics Google, and we get you a lot of good information on that. I'm also, you guys know I'm working with Baitworks and Boatworks in Springfield, Missouri. All the stuff we're talking about here is available there at Baitworks. I'll put the links for all that in the description here. If you guys are looking to buy a new or used boat, Boatworks is the place to go. This place is run by fishermen, owned by fishermen. They're just the greatest dealership in the world. You can also, at Baitworks, you can get my Blocket old school jig there exclusively at Baitworks. A good way to support the channel. A couple different ways also is if you guys are interested in becoming a member of the channel, all you have to do is when you click on my YouTube homepage, it says join. That gives you the information to be a channel member. If you guys are interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, just shoot me a private message on my Facebook, Randy Blockett, Professional Angler. And finally, I'd like to invite you to check out my second YouTube channel, The Fishing Teacher with Randy Blockett, which is geared towards anglers just getting started out. And if you'd like to subscribe and support that channel, that'd be much appreciated. So I'll put all those links in the description. Okay, got that out of the way. Okay, guys, let's talk a little bit about squarebills. Now, first of all, I'm going to give you sort of a history of them a little bit, and then we're going to get into breaking it down on how to fish them, where to fish them, getting into the baits and everything. This is a lot to cover here in this particular video. First of all, guys, the squarebills are one of the oldest lure categories out there. If you guys, back in the 70s, there was a lure called the Big O, which was a predecessor. It's just very similar to the modern day squarebill, except it had a smaller lip on it. And I think Norman made it, and this was like one of the first hottest lures out there. I mean, I remember when reading stuff in the 70s about it, like you couldn't buy one anywhere. People were paying $25 a piece for them, which was like unheard of at that time. Now we pay hundreds of dollars for lures, but back then $25 was like $100 and something or $200 now as far as paying for a lure. And then after the Big O, the Bagley Balsa B came along, which is this bait right here, which is still in production today, and it's still a big producer. This particular bait was a balsa bait. And the thing about squarebills, guys, they remained balsa up until just fairly recently in terms of the overall length this bait category has been around. It's only been recently that the change to the plastic squarebill. This is the Megabass S crank. This is the old Bagley B3 balsa wood plastic Megabass, but it's only been recently that they've changed to plastic and balsa. And there's still a place for both. There's a place for balsa and plastic, both we'll get into. So anyway, this lure category has been one of the most effective bass catching lures in tournaments and recreational fishing for 50 years, and it still is effective today. There's just something about the way a squarebill works that's highly productive, and it's all about the lip design, guys. This is when you're talking about a squarebill. Let's talk a little bit about the lip first. It's all about the lip, which is a square lip. This signifies what a squarebill crankbait is, and the basic premise behind a squarebill crankbait is the deflection properties that the squarebill offers. Now, one of the things and one of the reasons the squarebill has been so effective over the years is you can fish it in cover in places that you can't throw other crankbaits because they'll get hung up. But with the lip design on a Squarebill, this bait is actually designed to crawl over and around cover. So when you cast this and say it comes down and it hits a log or a piece of wood or a branch or something, instead of getting hung up, it'll still get hung up. It's not like completely weedless, but instead of getting hung up like a traditional crankbait that tends to dig down, this thing usually kicks off to the side and deflects off of that particular piece of cover, allowing you to fish that thicker cover. And it is this deflection quality that it has that is the key to a Squarebill bait being so successful. It's like when that bait comes down like this and hits a piece of cover and it kicks off like that, that's usually when the fish get it. And it's unique to this bill design, that particular deflection quality. It's not necessarily how the bait runs, because overall, guys, a Squarebill crankbait to me does not look as good just running through the water as a regular crankbait. I mean, it does a lot of, different ones have different actions, but its inherent value is its deflection properties in heavy cover. And that's why it's been so effective for quality fish, is because bigger fish live around heavier cover. And the crankbait, the Squarebill, allows you to put a bait that a lot of people have reserved for things like spinner baits and Texas rigs and jigs and that type of stuff. So that's a little bit about behind it. So next thing, let's talk a little bit about where you want to fish the Squarebill before we get into well, actually, let's get into the bait first, because you need an understanding of the bait before you can really know where to fish it. So let's get into the bait specifics. So anyway, first of all, I want to talk about size. Now there's basically 3 different sizes in a Squarebill. You have the small one here, just like this is the Megabass S Crank 1.2, and this is just a little generic Squarebill right here. Both of them are fairly small. These are this 1.5 size. This is I think this is a Lucky Strike, but this 1.5 size Squarebill is the most popular size out there. This is especially over the past 10 years or so. Tons of fish have been caught on these smaller ones. So you've got the smaller ones, and then you'll move up to the mid size like this is the S Crank 1.5, and this is actually a custom made by Dave's Custom Baits right here. Just a mid-size model here. Here's the 2 difference between the 1.2 and the 1.5. You can see just a slight difference in there. And then you have the larger sizes, which is the 3-inch models. And here's another one by Dave's Custom Baits. This is the Balsa. This is the Megabass 2.0. This is a 3-inch long bait. So you got basically 3 different profiles with that. Now let's talk a little bit about when to use those profiles, and then we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about color. We're going to talk about as far as seasonal patterns, where to fish it, what to look for, retrieves, tackle, all that type of stuff. So basically the 3 different sizes are applicable in different times of the year under different situations with water clarity and cover. Most of the time, let's talk about the big ones, and we'll go first. The big Squarebills like this are the ones that I sort of reserve for the springtime of the year. I have found that a big Squarebill is going to work best once that water temperature starts to get into the 50s, and as it raises up into the 70s, like in May and first part of June. So for me, the large size Squarebill like this is reserved for like the months of March through late May, sort of like what we're in right now. There's something about the bass prefer a little bit larger forage this time of year, and the larger Squarebill just attracts more fish and bigger fish. So it's like you can get into a situation where you're catching fish on a Squarebill on a big one like this, and then you can go back through that same water with a little one and maybe not catch at all. They just really key in on the big baits here. Now the mid-size one is more what I consider sort of the workhorse. This would be for situations specifically Summertime, that type of deal, all this thing can work in the springtime of the year too. Most of the time, the workhorse mid-range is going to be when you have conditions that are a little bit tougher. Say, for example, if you've got a sunny day out there with not much wind, the smaller size, like the mid-size, maybe work better than the 3-inch size. The 3-inch size will tend to work a little bit better if you have low light conditions and windy skies, rainy, that type of stuff. Those lower light conditions, they will go for the bigger size, but you can go in that same area with a little bit smaller one and catch them on those conditions that are a little bit tougher. And then finally, the small size, like the 1.2 size like this is the one that I like in the late summer into fall, specifically if the water is low. Now, one of the things that you're going to find out about squarebill fishing, specifically in the summer and the fall, is if you have low water conditions and warm water, the bass want something smaller for the most part. You can catch good fish even on a small one. So I have just found over years of experimentation that once that water starts falling, which it does a lot of time in late summer and early fall, if I go to a small squarebill, I just get a lot more bites with that. So those are the situations where they work pretty good here. Now we're going to go as far as specific, areas of the lake here in a little bit. But next, let's move into color a little bit here. Now, color is a big deal on squarebills because color to me has I put a lot of emphasis on color on a lot of different lures, but there's not many lures out there, with the exception of jerkbaits, where color is as critical as I feel it is with squarebills, because whatever it is, it has to do with the depth range that the crankbait runs in or whatever. But if you key in on the wrong color on a squarebill, you may not catch hardly nothing, but if you key in on the right color, you're going to catch everything. And I'll give you guys an example here. I was fishing up at a lake called Stockton Lake last year. It was actually last June or something like that it was. And it was perfect conditions for a squarebill. There were some rocky banks up there. The water was a little bit low. Water was dirty too. It was just really set up good for a squarebill crankbait. And I went through there and I started fishing a little bit brighter squarebill, like this, blackback and chartreuse side in there. Water visibility was maybe, I'm going to guess, 18 inches or something like that. And it looked okay in the water, but it almost like it stood out a little bit too much. It was like a little bit too bright. So then I decided to go to a little bit more subtle color. So I put on like a shad pattern, something like this. And the shad pattern, again, it's like it looked okay in that water clarity, but it sort of like blended in a little too much. It's almost like the water was stained enough it just did not stand out enough that I felt comfortable with it. And then and both of these I fished for a while. I fished them for like a half hour and didn't do any good, but I was convinced that the fish were on this bank. And finally, I started throwing a bluegill pattern like this, and started catching them on it really good. The way the bluegill pattern looked in that water clarity with the sunlight conditions we had that day, it just looked right, and the fish started hitting it. Now, this is one of the things that this is sort of a higher level part of squarebill crankbait fishing and other type of hard baits, is that eventually, guys, what happens is you will be able to determine the color of squarebill that you want to use based upon the water clarity, the light intensity, and the wind by the way the bait looks in the water. And I've talked about this before, and I've got to reiterate it because it's so critical, is the best way that I can explain it is when you, say for example, you just throw a bait out by your boat and run it by the boat to look at it in the water. Now, when you do that and you see this bait running through the water, you want that bait to be able to stand out a little bit, but you don't want it to stand out too much. You want it to blend in a little bit also, but you don't want it to blend in to the point where it's almost invisible. There's a fine line between blending in and standing out that you have to learn. This is something that comes with time. And the best way that I can do it, that's the best way that I can describe it. I can't really, if you were in the boat with me, I could show you, but that's the best way to describe it. So the point of the matter is, there's a broad range of colors. Now I'm gonna go through some of them, and then I'm gonna explain a little bit. Let's like, you got your perch patterns like this, and I consider this is like a real bluegill pattern. This is the Megabass S Crank, and this is the Dave's Custom Bait. Both of these are perch patterns. It's like, even though the Dave's is not as realistic as the Megabass, this still resembles a perch, and it stands out a lot. It'll draw fish from a great distance, but anytime that you're using something that has gold or green or chartreuse on it, you're targeting perch. The next one you have is you've got a variety of different shad patterns. Get this out of here. Should have laid all this stuff out, but I didn't. But the shad patterns are the ones that there's a tremendous amount of difference in them, because you'll have a translucent shad pattern like this. Like you can probably see my finger moving behind it a little bit. This is like a translucent shad. And then you'll have more of a flat finish shad that you can't see through it. Both of these are shad finishes, but the level of transparency is different. Now, this makes a huge difference, because when you are dealing with shad patterns, for example, I can't sit there and tell you it's like shad pattern works in clear water and dirty water both, because if you're using both, if both of these are shad patterns, but one is going to be highly effective over the other in different conditions. When you have a shad pattern that has a flat finish on it, like that, like a pearl or a white, this bait can be really good in muddy water, because a flat finish of pearl or white stands out as much as chartreuse does. So this could be a murky water color. Even though it's a shad pattern, it may not work good in cleaner water, but the translucent one will, anytime you got a translucent one. So there's a lot of variations in shad patterns, but the thing that you have to do is you have to determine the level of transparency or flatness that you need based upon the water clarity, again, and the sunlight conditions. So let me give you guys an example. Let's say that, say we're fishing a body of water that's got 2.5 foot of visibility, and it's a cloudy condition, and the wind's blowing, low light conditions, or it's early in the morning. You may go out in the morning under those conditions and catch them in 2.5 foot of visibility on the flat-sided shad pattern. But say for example, you're catching some fish, and then all of a sudden the wind stops blowing, the sun comes out, it gets brighter, and then they get off of it in that 2.5 foot clarity. A lot of times you can change to the translucent pattern in that same situation, even though the environmental light conditions are different, and you keep catching them. This is the subtle difference between it. And when you're talking about subtle differences in a Squarebill crankbait color, you're dealing with not as much the water visibility, but the other factors that contribute to the light penetration in that particular water visibility. Because again, if you use that standard of 2 foot visibility, 2 foot visibility looks completely different on a cloudy day versus a sunny day. It looks completely different on a calm day versus a 20-mile-an-hour wind day. It looks completely different at 8 o'clock in the morning versus 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And every time that you have one of those changes in the light intensity, sometimes it requires a color change on your bait too. And even though I can give you guys a sort of a foundation where to begin with on that, a lot of times it's just experimentation that comes with that. Now, so those are the perch and the shad patterns, which are my two primary ones. Now, the third one is some type of a crawdad pattern like this. Now, I got to be honest with you guys. To me, the crawdad pattern in a Squarebill, it's the least versatile of any color out there. I have not done any good on any type of crawdad pattern Squarebill, with the exception of in the springtime of the year. Now, obviously, I think a lot of people understand that a little bit. We all know that crawdad patterns work good in the spring. You know, a lot of us bass feed heavily on crawdads in the spring because, it provides more protein for their egg sacs. Maybe that's it. Maybe it has something to do with the water clarity. I don't really understand all the the details behind it. But if you try to throw a shad or a crawdad pattern, say for example, in late August around the shallow laydown versus a shad pattern out there, you're not going to catch much on the crawdad pattern, I can assure you. So the crawdad pattern is probably the one that I do use the least, although I do use it specifically when the water temperature is in the low to mid 50s. That's when it stands out quite a bit. So that is an overview of the colors there for a second. Okay, now before we get into the specifics of where you want to fish this and different type of retrieves and all that type of stuff, let's talk a little bit about the hardware on a Squarebill crankbait. First of all, let's talk about the buoyancy on them. Now, the balsa right here is obviously going to be a lot more buoyant than a plastic. I mean, your rise rate is going to be significantly faster on the balsa simply because of the wood associated with it. Therefore, the balsa is better, in my opinion, especially if you're fishing around heavy cover, or if you're fishing, water less than 2 feet deep, and you're fishing water that's a little bit warmer. If you're fishing that water that is more up in above 60 degrees, simply because of the buoyancy of it. The ideal situation, in my opinion, for a balsa wood crankbait is what I call extreme deflection, where you really, really want a lot of deflection. Say, for example, you're bouncing it off of big rocks hard, or you're bouncing it off of stumps and laydowns and dock pilings and that type of stuff, simply because it's more efficient. It allows you to, the bait just won't get hung up as much. And also, there's a little bit difference as far as the action on it. The action can be, most of the time from what I've seen in the balsa wood has a little bit wider action than the plastic does. And also there's a different sound on it. Although most Squarebill crankbaits are silent, still the sound of the hooks clacking against the bait is a little bit different. So there's some slight variations with that. So the balsa actually is, I've probably caught, when you're talking in terms of big fish on it, I've probably caught more big fish on the balsa crankbait than I have the plastic. Probably because, but I fished them longer, but I fished them 3 times as longer, historically. So maybe that's the deal. But for the most part, guys, when I'm fishing balsa, I'm fishing dirty water, heavy cover, a little bit warmer water. That's sort of my rule of thumb with that. Now, on the plastic ones, one of the things that, one of the issues that you're going to have on any Squarebill crankbait is the fact that they're not neutral buoyant. They do float up. Even the plastic ones will float up, fairly quick. And this can be an issue, especially early in the spring if that water temperature is still in the 50s. So one of the things that I like to do is I'll put some lead weight on the belly here. I'll put like some suspend strips, suspend dots, that type of stuff to try to slow the float up. And this can be highly effective when that water is a little bit cooler and you're not fishing the bait real quick. In fact, one of my favorite conditions to fish a Squarebill is in the spring when that water temperature is in the mid 50s. And when it's in the mid 50s, those fish they're still not super active. I mean, they're feeding, but they're still not super active. And I usually always put weight on it. I don't weight it enough to where the bait is like completely neutral or sinking, but I try to slow the rise down significantly, because in cooler water, excuse me, in cooler water, I'm doing more of a medium retrieve and a stop and go. And when I stop it, I don't want that bait to float up, because I don't want to lose my depth on it, because I don't have much depth to begin with. So I do not want to lose any depth. That's why I really want to slow it up. So that's one aspect of it. And the next one, guys, is hooks. Hooks are another big aspect of it here, as far as having the right hook on. And the hooks that I use on there, I use these. I don't have these changed out because I don't have them ready for tournaments yet. But I replace all of my hooks on all my Squarebills. Excuse me, it's talking too long. With the Gamakatsu G Finesse trebles, I find that that's a light hook. It hooks the fish really good, so that's the one I go to. But I think one of the biggest mistakes people make on a Squarebill is they put too big of hooks on the thing. One of the things that you will find out about on a Squarebill is if you go to a little bit smaller hook, you're not only going to allow this bait to get through the cover better, it's not going to get hung up near as much, but you actually hook the fish better because the smaller diameter wire on the smaller hooks offer more penetration than the larger diameters. One of the biggest mistakes I see guys making with Squarebills is they think since they're fishing it around heavy cover, sometimes with heavy line, they can go to big hooks on it, and you will lose fish like that. Hooking power is all related to the diameter of your hook, and you don't want a big diameter hook because it requires more hooking pressure, so you want to go down in size. So the recommendation I would give you, if you're fishing a larger Squarebill like this, like a Megabass 2.0 or a 3-inch or some type of a 3, go to like a number two treble hook on the front and back. If you're fishing like the medium size one like this, like a 2.5-inch size, go to the number 4 on front and back. And then if you're fishing the smaller ones here like this, go to a number 5 on it. Now it's probably about one size smaller than what most people fish, but it's been my experience, guys, that it simply works better with that. You simply, just catch a lot more fish. And you also, another thing here is always make sure that you're tying your bait with a split ring. Never use a snap, never tie straight to it. Split ring is the way to do it. One other little tip I'll give you guys, sometimes I'll take red fingernail polish and I'll paint the gills on it. I've noticed that helps out quite a bit. And another thing that I will tell you about it is sometimes in the summertime, if you're fishing dirty water, try putting red hooks on it. Actually, the person that got me onto this was Takahiro More. We were fishing the 2004 Bassmasters Classic at High Rock Lake, and in the Classic there, they used to have it, not anymore, but we all fished out of identical boats, and they parked us in line with each other every day of the tournament, and Takahiro's boat was always next to mine, and we were working on tackle the night before the Classic, and Takahiro showed me this box of Squarebill crankbaits he had in there, and it was completely full. There must have been 50 of them in there. Every single one of them had red hooks on it, and he won that tournament on a Squarebill crankbait. And ever since then, I started using red in the summertime, and sometimes it can really help out. So I use that red Gamakatsu round bend treble for that. Okay, guys, that's the baits. Now let's talk, before we get into the areas and patterns and everything like that, let's talk a little bit about the retrieves and that type of stuff. One of the things that you're going to find out about Squarebill crankbaits is, even when I was talking about like when the water's a little colder, is a Squarebill crankbait is not designed to reel slow. It's designed for speed, and the speed and deflection quality is one of the things that makes that bait so appealing. So one of the things you never want to do with a Squarebill crankbait is you don't want to throw it out there and just reel it slow like that. You're not going to catch much at all with it. They're just not going to bite it. Even if that water temperature is in the 50s, a little bit cooler, you want to start out with just, some type of a medium fast retrieve. Stop and go, medium stop and go retrieve. As that water temperature gets warmer, as it gets up in the 70s, and specifically once it starts getting up into the 80s in the summertime, that's when you got to speed it up. So I'll throw it out there. I'll start cranking it fast like that. Stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, stop and go. I never want to let this bait, run straight through the water, uninhibited. I want it to come down, and I'm stopping it, or it's just jerking like that, but it's always moving forward. It's moving fast, but it's just crazy all over the place. Now, this is particularly true when you're bouncing it off cover. One of the things that you have to remember is when you anticipate hitting cover, one of the things that you want to do is, say for example, there's a lay-down tree up there, and I throw the Squarebill up there, and I'm coming, past that lay-down tree, and there's some limbs coming off of it, and I know I'm going to get ready to hit some limbs. When you're reeling that like there, one of the things you want to do is lift your rod tip up and bring the rod tip up and shake it like this as you're reeling it, because when this is right here is a tip that's worth the video, because not many people know about this, very few. But throw it out there, you're coming up over this, hold the rod tip high, shake it and work it at the same time. And what that does is, by shaking that rod tip, it makes that bait almost impossible to hang up, because when you shake it and reel it like that, it just sort of wiggles over the limbs like that. For whatever reason, you don't hardly ever get hung up. I bet probably I could make 100 casts into a lay down like that, and 99 out of 100 times I'm going to come through there without getting hung up. That's a really big thing. Okay, now with that, let's talk a little bit about line test. Now, line test is all relative to the depth that you need to attain. And I don't have a preference as far as my size of line. It's all situational. I do use I do all of my cranking with Seaguar and VizX fluorocarbon line. I've got a lot of confidence in it. It's small diameter, it's strong, and I'll adjust my pound test based on different situations. So line size, guys, is critical here. Now, and I'll give you guys a prime example, because I've had some situations where I felt the fish want a squarebill, but I didn't feel I could get the squarebill into the zone that I needed to with the traditional line sizes I throw, which traditionally I'm throwing 15 to 20 pound tests is what my preferable size is. So in one particular situation, I remember I put this little S crank on, this 1.2, I put it on 6 pound test line on a spinning rod and made long casts parallel to rocky banks and just ripped them doing that. I got that bait down to a depth that squarebills just don't usually get. I got it 3 feet deeper than what probably most people would with 15 pound test line. So you got to put the pound test line that you have on based upon 2 factors. Number one is your depth attainment on a clear bank, on a bank that does not have much cover on it. Now, when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about a gravelly bank, a rocky bank, a bluffy bank, or, that type of a thing, or maybe over a grass bed, something like that. If I'm not deflecting off of hard objects like wood and dock pilings, concrete or whatever, and I want maximum depth attainment, that's when I go down. And I have to determine how deep I think those fish are. If those fish are in 3 foot of water, and I'm using the little bit smaller bait, I may have to downsize to that 8 or 10 pound test line. If I want to hit a little bit deeper, I've got to adjust that. And then also with that is, if I'm fishing targets with it where I'm not concerned about the depth attainment, and the times that I'm not concerned about the depth attainment is if I'm coming through cover, like stumps or laydowns or stuff like that. These fish are going to come from a horizontal plane to hit it, so I'm not trying to get the bait maxed out like I would on a rocky bank. When I'm in a situation like that, that's when I go heavy line, up to 25 pound test line. Say, for example, if I'm cranking stumps and laydowns and the water visibility is 12 inches and the water's 3 foot deep, I'm going to use 25 pound test Seaguar and VizX on it. I don't need the depth attainment, and I need the extra power from the heavy line with the heavy cover. So don't get locked into your line test. Use the line that's appropriate to get the bait to the depth that you feel that the fish are in. It's going to help you out a lot. Also with rods, guys, rods are important with square bills. Generally, I use a rod that is a little bit softer than I would, a little bit stiffer than I would for most crankbaits. A lot of crankbaits that I fish, I'm using a fairly medium to soft, action rod. Now with the square bills, I'll go up a little bit stiffer on there. My favorite square bill rod is probably that Megabass Orochi 110 Special. It's got sort of I would call it a medium tip on it, a medium fast tip. But you need to have a little bit more power on your tip in order to move that bait a lot of times, because if you're throwing a big bait, like the 3-inch square bill like this, you've got to have a little bit of power in the rod tip when that fish hits the bait to move the bait in the fish's mouth, because it is a significant chunk of wood there. So you don't want some little super soft rod. Like a lot of guys crank with those glass rods. I don't really like that with a square bill. But I just don't think there's enough power in it. So I'm going to go to a little bit stiffer rod than normal on there. Another thing with Squarebill, guys, is when you're casting out there and you got your rod, never point your rod like down to the water or straight at the bait. You want to make your cast and make sure you're reeling off to the side. So if you cast this way, make sure your rod's pointing like at a 45 or 90 degree angle, because you need that flex. It's like when that fish hits that bait, if your rod is pointing straight at it, you're not going to have the flex, and you're not going to have the stretch in the line. And sometimes that slight hesitation is going to be enough to get that bait a little bit deeper. And also, if you're off at an angle like that, it'll crawl through that cover a little bit better. So I've got to take 1 second break here. I'll be right back. I got to let Sage out to go to the bathroom. Okay, guys, I'm back. Now let's get into areas a little bit. Areas and boat positioning too. This is the final leg of the seminar here. The thing that you have got to determine as far as the area goes is the area is going to be completely dictated by water clarity. Your water clarity is going to be more important than the part of the lake that you're fishing, because the water clarity is going to put a larger population of fish in that zone that the Squarebill crankbait reaches. If you're fishing an area of the lake that is too clear, you're not going to be in the right zone for a Squarebill to be an effective lure. So first of all, you have got to find an area of the lake that has less than 3 foot of visibility. Now, I'm not saying you can't catch them in greater than 3 foot of visibility, because if you have a tremendous wind, like a lot of wind and low light conditions, that can offset that, and you could probably catch some fish in cleaner water. But for the most part, you need less than 3 foot of visibility. And ideally, my ideal situation for a Squarebill is 1 to 2 foot visibility. 1 to 2 foot visibility is what I consider optimum for a Squarebill crankbait under any weather condition or any water temperature condition. So look for that area in there. First of all, look for the part of the lake that has that visibility in it. And most places around the country, you can find that somewhere. And for the most part, that's a lot of times that's going to be in your creek arms. It's going to be in your upper river arms. But if you're on a lake, like say, for example, Grand Lake in Oklahoma, or, Lake Eufaula in Alabama, or some body of water that has off-colored water, it opens up a lot more of the lake to you, because you can catch them on it all over the lake if you have that off-colored water. So search that out wherever you're looking. The first cover that you want to look for all year long, I don't care if it's in the springtime, summertime, fall time, whatever, is rock diversity. Now, rock is key on a Squarebill. I mean, there's two things key, rock and wood both, but rock is really key to a Squarebill, especially if you have off-colored water. If you've got off-colored water and some type of rock transition, some type of significant rock structure in a lake, you're going to have a Squarebill bite going on somewhere. And the type of rock and how it's positioned and how it's set up, it can be wide ranging. It may be a bluff, it may be basketball sized rock, it may be chunk rock, it may be pea gravel, it may be riprap, it may be a wide variety. But the thing that you have to remember anytime that you're fishing rock with it, like we talked earlier, is you have got to be hitting something. If you're not bouncing off of something on a Squarebill crankbait, you're not going to catch many fish. If you say for example, if you're throwing it down a riprap bank, which riprap is a great structure for Squarebill crankbait, and you throw it up against the bank and you start reeling it, and you're feeling it hit the bottom for maybe 3 or 4 feet off the bank, and then all of a sudden you lose contact with that, hardly ever are you going to catch any fish on that. So you need to position your boat angle and boat positioning needs to be positioned in relationship to keep your bait bouncing off an object as long as possible. If you're on a bank that's got a sharp angle, you may have to get your boat right up against the bank and make a long parallel cast and keep it that far off the bank all the time. If you're on one of those flat points, say you're on like a lake, like Grand Lake, it's got a lot of like long flat points with big rocks, and you may be 100 yards off the bank and it's still only this deep. So if you're in that type of situation, you can fan cast around and you can hit the bottom everywhere. So the angle and the slope of your bank is going to determine your boat positioning with that anytime you're fishing with wood. Now, another thing that I'm going to suggest with a Squarebill, and I'm going to suggest this whether you're fishing wood or rock, is always fish with the wind. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but I have found, guys, that if you fish with the wind, there's a couple of different things that come with it. Number one, your presentation's quieter. You're not on the trolling motor as much. The wind allows you to drift. It allows you to work your trolling motor at a slower speed. When your bait hits the water, you have better contact with it based upon how hard the wind's blowing. I always seem to get more bites if I'm fishing with the wind. Now the wind, sometimes sometimes it's blowing right into the bank, sometimes it's with it. But what I'm trying to say is try not to cast into the wind, because you just are not going to catch as many fish. You can't make as long of a cast. You're going to be noisier on the trolling motor. You're going to lose contact with your bait. It's going to be more difficult to make your presentation. So what I'll do is if I pull into a bank or something like that, I always check the direction of the wind, and I always position my boat to come down with the wind. Now, even if the wind's blowing hard, if I blow through there too quick, I'll just crank up and make another pass down it. So that's a big element with that. Now, laydowns is a different thing. The claim to fame, and one of the biggest secrets that guys like Rick Clunn, myself, and other people use for years is the technique of making multiple casts on shallow water wood cover with a Squarebill. Guys, there was a period of time back in the 80s and 90s where, even though it sounds common today, people didn't do it. Now, when you're fishing shallow wood with a Squarebill crankbait, unless the fish are really aggressive, you're not going to get them on the first couple casts. Most of the time, a Squarebill around wood cover, I don't care if it's stumps, laydowns, logs, docks, or whatever like that, it's going to come after repeated casts to there. Because a lot of times when you're fishing wood cover, you're fishing it during warmer water, and those fish a lot of times are lethargic in warm water, and they're not real active and aggressive, but they'll feed. They're opportunistic feeders, and they feed by reaction. And a lot of times multiple casts to the same piece of cover will generate that strike, or multiple casts from different angles. Therefore, when you come up to a piece of cover, whatever it may be, logs, docks, whatever, don't just make one or two casts around it and go on. You need to circle the thing. You need to make as many casts as you can possibly have. And co-anglers out there, if you're watching this, let your pros do that. Don't cast one time. Don't let him cast one time and then you cast right in there on that same laydown, because he can't do what he needs to do. So multiple presentations around that shallow cover is really, really critical for that. And this is easier said than done, because a lot of times people tend to slop through areas. And when you're picking shallow cover with a Squarebill, you have got to approach it almost like you're pitching and flipping with that type of stealth and pace. Because a lot of times if I'm fishing heavy cover with a Squarebill, I flip it and pitch it just like I would a jig or something like that. So I got to get the dog one more second. I'll be right back, guys. Sorry about that, guy's back. So anyway, the point of the matter is when you're fishing that shallow cover, you have got to just fish slow, stealthy, make multiple presentations, and a lot of times don't make short casts. I mean, I remember there was this one tournament I fished, one of the best Squarebill clinics I've ever seen. I drew Larry Nixon out at the Truman Lake in one tournament, and he was fishing a Squarebill, a big Balsa B3 Squarebill in that tournament. And all day long, he did good in the tournament with me, caught a limit with me, and his cast would only be like 10 foot long. He'd just pitch it out or make a little short cast by a piece of cover like that. And, he generated the strike with that, with the accuracy. And that's another thing about it, is when you're fishing a Squarebill around, I don't care if it's wood or rock cover, you have got to be extremely accurate with it. These fish are not going to come from a great distance away to hit that Squarebill, simply because normally you're fishing a little bit more off-colored water. So one of the reasons that the need for repeated casts is a lot of times you need to be actually bumping that piece of wood before that fish will actually get it. So anyway, guys, that is the basic premise of Squarebill fishing. It's situational. It's a situational bait, but if you get in the right situations, it is extremely difficult to beat for quality fish, because in my opinion, a squarebill crankbait is one of those lures that on the average it catches a lot larger fish than other crankbait categories, simply because of everything we've talked about today. And if you don't fish them, you've got to get some confidence in them, because it's one of those few baits that has stood the test of time. There are very few baits that were around in the 70s and they are still around today just as effective, and the squarebill is one of them. I can only count of a couple. There's squarebill crankbait, a jig, Texas rig worm, spinnerbait, something like that. A lot of the others have fell by the wayside. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the seminar. Much appreciated. Like I said, I'll put the Baitworks link in the description. You guys can get you any squarebill that you want there. They got everything. So much appreciated, and we'll talk to y'all later.